Good afternoon, restaurant fans and restaurant folks. This is Steve Barnes here with Times Union Live. I write the table hopping blog and column for the Times Union and have been extremely busy over the past 4+ months trying to track all of the changes going on in the restaurant world. One of the biggest ones started just last week when Governor Cuomo, in response to lack of social distancing, mass gatherings, particularly in New York City, but also elsewhere, declared a new rule that food must be purchased with an initial alcohol order. This sent restaurants in a crazy tizzy trying to figure out what this meant. And we have not yet been able to figure out exactly what this means because a place in Saratoga called Harvey's Restaurant and Bar jokingly put Cuomo chips on their menu for $1, and they went viral with that. They've been interviewed by all sorts of national outlets as well as everybody locally. And then they were told, no, chips were insufficient. There had to be chips and dip. And then they got an update that said, no, there had to be more substantial even than that. And to help us try to sort this out, we've got Scott Wexler, who's the longtime executive director of the Empire State Restaurant and Tavern Association. And he's going to try to help us figure out what's going on because, Scott, you have all the answers, right?
I'd like to think that I have all the answers, Steve. They may not all be good answers or answers people like, but I'll try.
Or correct.
And the answers I give you now may not be accurate in an hour. Because the one thing from the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak here in New York, as it relates to rules for business, the one thing that we've learned is that things are constantly changing, as you noted in the introduction.
Right. And so last Thursday, when I believe it was Thursday, this was coming out, you and I spoke and you said you'd heard it was coming and you had a few hours advance notice, and then the governor mentioned it, and then things just all fell downhill after that because things were changing and there wasn't clarity. So it seems pretty simple. You must order food with alcohol, but it's not. So tell us, as you understand it and what you've been advised, how many members do you have?
We have a couple of thousand members statewide, but of course, in times like this, whether they're a member of the association or not, folks tend to come to trusted sources. And over time, I guess the Tavern Association has been viewed as a trusted source. Our website has a high level of traffic, email, et cetera.
Okay, so what can you say for certain that is permissible?
So again, with the caveat that things are always changing. Right now, we have the governor issued an executive order on Thursday evening. You are correct about that, which requires any customer who, with their initial purchase of alcohol at an on-premise establishment, a restaurant, a bar, a hotel, place where you sit and have a cocktail, you must purchase food with your initial alcohol purchase. And the state liquor authority has published some guidance. They have not yet published FAQs. The association has published FAQs to the extent that we think we know what the questions are and what the answers are. But the answer to what food is where it really starts to get complicated. So it starts simply. If you want to purchase a drink, you have to purchase food with your initial alcohol drink purchase.
Right.
But what kind of food? Well, the food varies based on the kind of establishment that you're in. And this is where it really gets complicated. The executive order says that the minimal food that the customer has to purchase has to equal the minimal food that the establishment has to qualify for their liquor license. And different types of establishments have different food minimums. So quickly, a restaurant or tavern must offer its customers foods like sandwiches, soups, or other foods. Finger foods like chips and dip, they don't count. And so under this executive order, you have to have soup, sandwiches, or something similar. The liquor authority has described it to me like a small appetizer. I've been telling people like 4 mozzarella sticks, right? But if you're a manufacturing facility, a brewery, a distillery, a winery, or a cidery, or a meadery, you have a lower level of food service required to have a license, and therefore a lower level of food required. In a winery, for example, you could have chips and dip, and that would meet the food minimum. And if you're a private club, there's no food requirement in the ABC law. And so under this executive order, you can go and drink and not have to eat. So you know that after dinner drink or after work drink, Steve, you and I were talking about having, we can go have that drink at the Fort Orange Club or at Wolfert's Roost, but we can't go to the Town of Colony Golf Club or the Victory Cafe or any other establishment.
Now, I know they say soups, sandwiches, or other food that can be, frozen, pre-made, pre-cooked, that sort of thing. But how is it that, without throwing anybody under the bus, that places for 20 plus years have gotten by with essentially no food? I mean, there are bars, they're not private clubs, they're not breweries, it's not a tasting room for 9-pin cider. This is a bar, and they have, let's say, popcorn, and they've got a can of soup and some pretzels and things, and yet they've been open for decades. How is this possible? And this Caroline Street in Saratoga, without being specific to any place, is full of places, basically, you get pizza from next door. How is this permissible?
Yeah, understandable. We've had any number of members say to us, we're a bar, we don't serve food. To which our response is, well, when you applied for your liquor license 5, 10, 20, 30 years ago, you had to provide the liquor authority with evidence that you were going to meet this food minimum. Now, in many cases, it's a microwave oven and it's Hot Pockets. And those restaurants or those bars still have that microwave oven, but they still stock Hot Pockets. But customers very rarely take advantage of that service. I actually had one of our members tell me, I've had this microwave and these Hot Pockets, but nobody has ever ordered a Hot Pocket. I've never served anybody food. Until Thursday night, that wasn't required. On Thursday night, it became required. And now those customers have to order that minimum food. Now, the liquor authority has provided, not in writing, as you mentioned, but verbally, they've given me the guidance, and we've posted it on our website, that bars can meet this minimum food requirement either by selling that food to a customer directly, or if the customer purchases that food someplace else and brings it to the bar. So, for example, if they went to a quick serve restaurant and picked up a sandwich and then brought it to the bar and sat at the bar, and ate the sandwich while they were there having their cocktail.
Well, that isn't, how is that? They told you that, but I guess I don't understand why that, and I think it's terrific. So you can, I can walk into a Caroline Street bar with a piece of pizza, but how is that permissible if the executive order says purchase of food?
One of the things that I chose not to do when I was younger was to go to law school.
Huh.
And sometimes I regret it, but in a case like this, it's been a gift because I don't have to get caught up in the complications. At the end of the day, Steve, and you've been writing about this industry for a few years now, so you know that we have laws, then we have regulations, then we have interpretation and guidance. And at the end of the day, what we refer to as the rule of law, what are the ground rules we have to follow? They end up being the combination of that. So I'm not going to be critical of the liquor authority or the governor for providing some necessary flexibility to help make this work. I mean, look, at the end of the day, while we very definitely support the efforts of the governor and the liquor authority to enforce these strict public health rules, your blog posting yesterday, which appears as in today's newspaper, is very much in line with where we are coming from. We are in desperate times in this industry. Public health concerns have put government in a place where they're worried about whether we can continue to function in our business. And we need to follow these rules. And the rules they're asking us to follow are not unreasonable or that hard to manage. I mean, really, at the end of the day, what they're saying is don't have packed bars right now. Don't have congregant activity. And they're outlawing that activity, not just in our bars and restaurants, but in all kinds of places. I saw it today where Mayor Sheehan and the Albany police are going to be cracking down on parties like the one that happened recently, was it 4th of July, I think, on Hudson Avenue?
Right.
So those are good things. And we'd like the liquor authority to give us even more flexibility. So, for example, if chips and dip are good enough for the Fort Orange Club and for Wolfert's Roost, then they should be good enough for McGeary's and for the other establishments in town. And we're certainly going to encourage the governor and the SLA to be more flexible. We're actually encouraging them to be more firm on the bad actors and give those people who are enforcing the rules a little bit of flexibility so they can keep their businesses afloat until the situation allows us to go back to normal operations.
Well, why can't somebody come right out and say it? I mean, I understand there's gray areas, but I have had owners tell me in the last few days, well, Harvey's case in point, first they introduced the chips, they told it was insufficient, so they added dips with that, and then they said that was not sufficient, so they added a flatbread that has goat cheese and roasted beets, which sounds fantastic for $1. But then, this is additional food cost for them, and then the food's just getting thrown out because people aren't eating it. And then they were told again today, as a further update, that no, it needs to be something more from your regular menu, such as, like you said, maybe 4 mozzarella sticks with, because this is the capital region, we put raspberry on our fried mozzarella, or marinara. So
I like that approach better than that's my preferred approach over the years, for what it's worth. But
so why can't somebody say it? Why can't somebody say specifically? Because they wouldn't. I've tried to get the SLA on the record. Boom, tell us what's permissible. And frankly, I told you this yesterday. You're the second choice today. I was trying to get the chairman of the SLA on today with me. They said, no, he's too busy, but they did say partly it was because they are being tough. They were doing 4 summary suspensions for downstate places that were bad actors. Agreed. People are violating it. They need to be punished. But how come somebody can't help someplace like Harvey's that is trying to do the right thing? They get 3 different opinions over 3 days. Tess Collins at McGeary's flatly told me in one day she got 3 opinions from 3 different people she spoke to at the SLA. They want to do it right, and they don't know how to.
Yeah, no, I understand their frustration, and I can't answer for why the agency that's in charge of enforcing can't provide a direct, straight answer. The best the association can do is give the best answers that we have, and know that we'll stand behind the licensees if they follow the guidance that we're giving them, because we've gotten it from trusted sources. Now, the good news is that from everything I can, 2 points I want to make before we move on, Steve, if you'll bear with me. The first is that from what I'm seeing, the liquor authority, not only have they been flexible in terms of the guidance they've been offering, the way I described it, but they've also been reasonable and flexible when they go into establishments. What they're looking for is an attempt to comply. If they walk into a bar or restaurant and people are sitting down and there's an occasional person with a mask that slipped down off their nose or has forgotten, I've walked into a store once or twice forgetting my mask in my car, and I run outside and I get it, and I don't expect the store to get a violation for that.
Right.
So they've been really good about that. And on the other hand, my inbox this morning was filled because of the increased attention on this. My inbox this morning was filled with articles from all across the state, quoting local police and local municipal leaders saying how for the vast majority of bars and restaurants, they're being compliant, they're following the rules. And that reinforces what we've thought. We've got a small handful of bad actors who are putting us at risk. And while it's not completely focused in New York City, a lot of it is in New York City. And Mayor de Blasio had refused to have his police enforce this. In fact, I spoke to one of your colleagues in the media yesterday who claimed that over the weekend, where there were these scenes of revelers filling the streets, not even bars, these are people drinking in the streets out of cars, that the police were standing by passing out masks rather than enforcing the law. But I did read today that the mayor has announced that they're now going to begin enforcing the law. If the police and the SLA would focus on the bad actors, then Tess and Dawn and all the other responsible operators can do the right thing and work with the SLA to figure this all out, rather than against the SLA trying to interpret rules that they don't understand and frankly aren't necessary.
And one of the things Saratoga Springs had talked about they initially thought there was not any mechanism for them to enforce it because there was an interpretation from, I guess, like the deputy commissioner of the state police that basically said there was no way they couldn't do anything criminal. But I did just get a clarification from the governor's office today from Rich Azzopardi, the governor's senior counselor, that says there was an update on the health regulations for the State Department of Health, and individuals who violate this are subject to a maximum fine of $1,000. So this is, they can now do that. Saratoga was looking at their own law, similar to one that's in place downstate now, what would be a $250 fine. But with this, actually gives the police some teeth. So you can threaten somebody with this as opposed to just say, move along, here's a mask.
Yeah, and we don't, a couple of things. First of all, we don't want to see people arrested, jails filled with people who won't wear a mask or won't physically distance. But responsible people will do the right thing. I was talking to another reporter yesterday, and I said, the fact that police aren't enforcing these rules when people are having unlawful social gatherings in private places makes it harder for us to enforce these rules when they're in our places. If they can misbehave in their own backyards and neighborhoods, they're going to misbehave in our bars. And the other thing we have to be very careful about here, Steve, is that our concern about public health and the need to enforce these rules on the most flagrant violators can't become an excuse to target Black and brown people for activity that we're not going after others for. I mean, it strikes me that in New York City, the problem looks to be a bunch of 20-somethings from the Upper West Side who don't think the rules were written for them. And I certainly want to make sure that throughout the state, we're not enforcing rules in West Hills of Albany that we're not enforcing in Pine Hills of Albany. I'm not accusing the police of doing that. What I'm making clear is that in our call for enforcing these public health measures, it is not it should not be seen as an effort to continue, bad policing. People have to be treated, their rights have to be respected.
Yes. And completely agree. And case in point for this area would be Caroline Street in Saratoga. I was speaking to somebody who's in the liquor business and he covers Saratoga, has a lot of clients in Saratoga, and he's used to a thriving summer. This is somebody who spent years doing this stuff. He wouldn't even get out of his car. And he said he drove down slowly. He was looking in, and there were, people seated 6 feet apart with masks on. Staff had masks on. There was somebody at the door handing out masks, so they were compliant. But the street was swarming with these, 20-something young people. He said he counted 6 women getting piggyback rides from guys waiting to get into bars. And there were also a whole bunch of, underage, sub-21s, high schoolers and young college who were just hanging out because it's summer. They want to get outside. It's a nice weekend and summer in Saratoga. So this becomes an issue of enforcement for the police. And the governor certainly scolded police agencies yesterday. But particularly in Albany, when there's been a huge rash of violence and scores of shootings, is this something we really want to impose on our police? It's a tough thing, and I'm glad that you've clarified this for us, because at least to the degree to which you're able, that's accurate at this moment. And I hope we can, you can, if you get any more updates, you certainly put it on your website. Give us your website. Tell people how to find your agency's website.
It's very simple. It's the Empire State Restaurant and Tavern Association. So it's www.esrta.org.
Great. And if you were to offer very quick advice to a bar, it's what? A minimal amount of food. It doesn't have to be a full burger. It doesn't have to be a full order of wings. It's a minimal amount of food from their regular menu.
So this regular menu piece is new to me. Okay, I've not heard that yet, and I'm not. I think the point is it has to be. What the Liquor Authority has said so far is it has to be substantial food, but not a meal. I think small appetizer, right? Small plate appetizer. So think about going into a tapas bar, the kind of food you would order. And I think when an establishment, when I started representing the Tavern Association in 1985, so I had hair and it was dark,
I did too, but I was in high school.
Yeah, well, thanks. But the chairman of the Liquor Authority at the time told me there were three categories of licensees: the law abiders, the law violators, and the winkers. All right. And the winkers were the people who, tried to make it look like they were following the rules, but they really weren't. Right now, every licensee needs to behave like they're law abiders. Try to follow what you believe the rules to be. There is a large distinction between a restaurant that makes a mistake and a restaurant that is blatantly violating the laws.
Agreed.
It's the difference between having one underage person in the bar whose ID you checked and maybe it was a fake ID you didn't catch, versus a bar full of high school students. So the advice is, honor your responsibility, do the right thing. And I'm fairly confident the Liquor Authority will do the right thing back.
Very good. On that note, I appreciate it. We can call it for an end to today, although you and I are likely going to be speaking again on the telephone. Thank you a lot for coming on. This is Scott Wexler from the Empire State Restaurant and Tavern Association, trying to sort out for us the ongoing confusion about what it means for food to be sold with initial order of alcohol. Thank you, Scott. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, Steve. You too.
We'll be back next week, same time, 1 p.m. Tuesday, for a further edition of Table Hopping on Times Union Live. I'm Steve Barnes. Eat well and be well.